So one thing I get asked a lot is if we're making our requests after the component renders the first time instead of component did mount, aren't we going to have a gap where information is loading and it's not yet displayed? And the answer is yes, as we've already seen. And let's actually exaggerate that by adding in like 3 seconds of loading time. So slowing it down on purpose. So back in my Zen quote component, inside of our axios.get, afterwards, I have created a set timeout for 3000 milliseconds, so for 3 seconds, and then I'm just going to paste in what we had before. So this is going to load the data from this Zen API from GitHub, and then it's going to wait 3 seconds and then set the state. And this just gives us more time to add in a loading icon. So you can see it's not here just yet, and then it shows up. Hopefully your requests don't take anywhere near that long normally, but often if you're loading a lot of data, there will be some lag or some downtime between that first render when something shows up on the page, even if it doesn't include your data, and then when the data comes back and it re-renders because you changed the state. So let's do a loading icon in there. And the way you would do this, or this is a very simplistic way of doing it, is we would add a loading icon in here. So let's just do a div and give it a class of, or class name of loader, something like that. And then I have a CodePen open. Well, not one yet. I search for loader. Oh, look at this one, loading page by Cold Steel. All right, we'll steal that. So I'm just going to take the CSS styles for the colored spin animation, as well as the loader animation, or the loader styles. And I'm going to paste it into a new CSS file that doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to make that now, zenquote.css. And then in here, I'm going to paste that in. We don't need the spin. Okay, so if we have something with the class of loader, and we make sure, which I haven't done yet, that we actually import that file, /zenquote.css, we should see a loading icon right now. Okay, so now how do we make it appear at the beginning and then disappear when our data is ready, when this comes back? Well, we're going to need to use state to toggle the visibility. Let's make a property in our state called isLoading. Or how about isLoaded, which will start as false. So at the beginning, it's not loaded. So then down here, we can add some conditional logic. And what I'm going to do, I want both of these to appear when it is loaded and none of them to appear if it's not loaded. So I'm going to return this when they are loaded. And if they're not loaded, I want to return just this div. Okay, so I'm going to use a little ternary operator, as we've seen many times. This.state.isLoaded, question mark. And if it is loaded, then we want to render this. Otherwise, we'll render our loading icon. So we do need to wrap these in a div or some other element because JSX will get tripped up if we're trying to render these two siblings. Okay, I cleaned it up. Here's what it looks like. Is this.state.loaded true? If it is loaded, render this div, and it includes our quote. Otherwise, render the loading div and only the loading div. So right now, we're keeping isLoaded as false, always. We're never updating it, so we only see this. So all we have left to do is to turn it off, to set isLoaded to true when it makes sense. And where does that make sense? Well, once the data has come back after we waited our needless 3 seconds just to exaggerate the pause, we can come into here and say isLoaded is now true. So it started as false, and then the first render it was false, so we see the loader, and then component mount is called immediately after, and then we get our data, we wait 3 seconds. When that's done, we're going to set the state so that quote has changed and isLoaded has changed to be true. That triggers a re-render because we set the state. And then instead of here, we'll now display this instead of the loader because this now is true. So let's check it out here. Refresh the page. We wait 3 seconds and come on, there we go. Of course, we could make this a lot nicer. Instead of just abruptly ending it, we would fade it in or out or animate it in or out. I just want to show you a quick example of how you can handle that gap between when you start the first render and then when you get your data back. All right, so next I'm going to do one more example of loading data instead of component mount. I'm going to use an async function. If you feel good about this, you feel good about loading data with Axios or whatever library you want to use, you might want to just move on to the next thing, which is another lifecycle method, component did update.